January 28th, 2019. Everyday truth. So, sitting with a lot today. Today's Monday. And I'm getting ready for tomorrow night, my class, but I'm really just sitting with what's happening today. First thing is, I had an amazing psychodrama session with a friend who I met through psychodrama trainings. She's an expressive arts therapist in training. And all of this stuff I've been talking about with voice and how I haven't been able to find the voice who stands up to the criticisms and the fears. We somehow stumbled into that as the topic of our session, just for practice, but of course it was real. And I had an experiential embodied experience during the session of the contrast, what happens when that part of me crumples in response to these fear voices, which come across as attacks and criticisms, but it's coming from a place of fear. What happens is a crumpling, like a piece of aluminum foil just crumpled like this inside my belly, and then a complete muting of my voice. Like no comeback, nothing to say. And that's familiar to me. And then I had an embodied experience of me being in that alive place. If you watch my videos that I make on Tuesday evenings when I come back from my class, it's like, whoa, my God, I'm alive. It's the experience of being with people who want to hear more from me rather than less. And I have a kind of a default opinion of the world that most people don't want to hear more of what I really want to say. And because I believe that, I actually unconsciously select people, surround myself with people who really don't want to hear more of what I have to say, of what I want to say. I select people who like my performance versions of myself, which is the version of me that really is not fine with people not liking me. And in order to create something and have a voice, there has to be a part of you that's fine with not being liked, which I'm not there yet. So that's part of my DNA. However, in this, going back to the psychodrama session, I stepped into this other role, which was that me that I am when I'm fully alive, connected, like on a Tuesday evening, and I'm seeing the world as wanting to hear more of the real me, all of it, including the traumatic stuff and including the stuff I've learned in recovery from that. And not pretending that it just comes from nowhere, right? That the love and the light and the healing come from nowhere. That's a lie. Love and light and healing come from dark, knowing what the dark is. To rebel against something, you have to know something really well that you are pushing against and moving away from. And so they're both are required, and they're sort of in this peculiar form of harmony. So what's happened this year is that I've developed a new group of people, friends, that are not geographically near me, but are spread around a little bit. But we find ways to gather because we're dedicated to this process of healing, transforming, finding truth, growing. Sorry about all my branding here. I just happen to be wearing 2 branded pieces of clothing, not for sponsorship. But so when I stepped into that role of being the me that's really alive, I all of a sudden had this strong voice that could match the intensity of the voice of criticism. That the other voice, that the other role that I thought was me, the adult me, which clearly it's not, um, completely crumpled and was mute. So that was the huge breakthrough of this weekend. And I thank my friend for arranging that practice session that accidentally arrived at that breakthrough. So that's one thing I'm thinking of. The second thing, I'm still sitting with Kenny Yoon's feedback from last Tuesday, which was encouraging me to think outside the forms that reinforce patriarchy, the patriarchal dominance that that the character of my father was imposing in that scene. Um, and I've been thinking a lot about that because I wanted to really contemplate what that means, what that could potentially mean, and I think I've zeroed in on the piece of writing that I want to do, to like a monologue from me, that expands on it and assumes that people want to hear that. And that's a big leap, because there's a part of me that jumps into like, oh, if I'm going to have an audience and perform it, I know how to make it into a performance that people will like. Whatever that means, right? It means stuff I've seen work with other people before, or stuff I've seen on a screen. And if it's on a screen, that means somebody has paid for it and it's valid. But I'm not validating the impulse that just comes from me. And I think this is a really important phase in my development of decolonizing this central aspect in my life, which is performance. It was the first relationship, other than my family, immediate family, that I was introduced to at the age of 3. My music teachers, who taught me what performance was and how to practice and how to be perfect and what things had to be and how what the standards were. And here's the thing that I have battled with, which is like, I was taught so much respect from that process, so much worship of those standards. And this last 10 years of my life have been about deconstructing all of those standards. The big turning point that I have not explicitly stated, I've tried to talk around it to try to explain it to people. But tomorrow I'm going to try to just talk right about it and assume that, this is a starting point. I'm going to see what performance emerges from like stating my central idea, which I've never clearly stated. So Play the Wrong Note was such a central turning point in my life. Why? At the time, I had no idea why. I was stunned into that place of, the only response I knew was crumpling and muting myself and imitating. I became a really good imitator. I'm such a good student. I'm really good at being trained in things because I just go into a room and I become a sponge, taking in every detail of how things are done correctly, meaning what pleases the teacher. What do they want? What do they want? What do they want from me? I can give it. I can do it. That's called codependency. But it also, and it comes from fear, but guess what? It also can make you a very high performing professional in so many fields in the West and around the world, because the world is emulating the West. So following authority figures works. That's the problem with decolonization and liberation of the individual. We don't have the structures that reward the liberated individual, or liberated communities of individuals, that we're sort of like these islands floating in between, in the interstices of society, trying to eke out a way, usually based on others who are kind of seeking their own form of liberation. And if we're authentic, we're trying not to impose the old patriarchal models in our way of delivering service. So my problem with trying to sell coaching, which I still haven't arrived at my own authentic way of doing it, is that it's still the sales model is still buy from me. I'm the expert. I'm the guru. I have the knowledge. You should pay me for it. And those are old. I know those are old thoughts. There's other ways to think about it, but I haven't felt into or experienced a way that really feels like, yeah, we're really in this together, and I am supported in my life to give money to someone in return for what they have, and then therefore I can be in a position to accept money from others to give what I have to them. So today I read this. This I've seen before, but I cut it out and put it in my sketchbook to just highlight it because I wanted to really think about it. And it's from Leela Watson. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So that's a great sentence to really listen to, into the gut, into the belly, into the lower body. And that's another article I read today from this great somatic therapist that I somehow discovered online. But he writes some really great thought-provoking pieces about decolonizing the body, and his URL is selfishactivist.com. And he talked about the emphasis of awareness of the lower body from the belly and hips down to the feet as being absent in Western cultures because of chairs, furniture, ways of working and being, clothes, mobility. Just looking at, if you go anywhere in the East, you look at the people that are squatting and how everything, like even in Japan now, where a lot of families still sleep on the floor on tatamis, and how different that experience is, sleeping on the floor and interacting with the ground so closely in daily life. Removing shoes when entering a home. I can't imagine wearing my outdoor shoes in the space that I live in, because it's like, why would I bring all of the urban decay and detritus into my living space? But that's like not even a question for so many people. I can't walk around in my home after having been on the BART or walking through San Francisco. It's just not happening. I'm not bringing those shoes into my living space. I don't even care if I just walked on the beach. I'm not bringing those shoes in my living space. So this is what I loved about Thai massage, Brima, body work. These were practices that were on the ground. And so reading that article today, I was just like, oh, I got to go back to my somatic practices. So I keep getting pulled back into the cycle of all of these practices that I've learned in the last 10 years, but I'm still obviously struggling to integrate them into a Western lifestyle, into a Western culture, which I already feel totally not part of. I'm totally not in the culture. I'm an observer of the culture, and I'm a cautious participant wherever I can be, because I'm very aware that I'm challenging and threatening to the culture because of my observer status. But I have a body. I still have an experience in this body, and I know that yoga has been so important to me in the last 20 years, but also working out at the gym has been important to me. So I've been going back to that for the last 3 months, going back to the gym, and then just noticing, what really lands with me. And it's not so much the spinning classes anymore, where it's like push the cardio and it's okay. Like spinning is okay. I don't get a huge adrenaline rush out of it like I used to. But I love the feeling of lifting weights. And there's these group classes, body pump and high and HIIT, which are these great experiences of just experiencing the strength of the body. And yes, weightlifting is totally this Western thing, but our lifestyles are so sedentary that, we're not working in the fields. We're not even doing anything with our hands anymore. That these simple strength exercises are very enlivening. And so I'm balancing that really positive feeling I get from that with understanding that coming home and doing some really grounded stillness, flexibility, lengthening in yoga is so much a part of that equation. And finding, right now I'm sitting on a bar stool because my drafting table where I have my dual workstation with one side a computer and the other side my art dry media workstation is like at a almost standing desk height. So I spend a lot of my days when I'm here off the ground. My feet aren't even touching the ground. They're touching the footrest on my bar stool. So finding time to sit on the ground in meditation or, in any kind of even putting hands on the ground, feeling feet on the ground, just consciously, even in forward fold. Those are all really, really important practices. Why? Not for fitness, not for how my body looks, which, by the way, in the last 10 years, since I have sort of been in this decolonization exploration process, my body shape has changed in such a way that it doesn't match the Western ideals that I've seen in magazines that I did such a good job of achieving through overwork, uh, under eating, and hyper exercise and high stress, which actually produced a size 4 Lisa, which I was very proud of at the time. Cannot tell you how proud I was. Cannot tell you how sad I was when I got to a size 6 and then an 8. It was like tragic. So, but then, these, what I've just observed in the last 10 years is, wow, that my body doesn't look the same way as those magazines. But when I look at my body, I can look at my body more with less judgment in the mirror. But I'm also aware that, wow, it's so different from how I know from shadows of my past that I've told myself it's supposed to look. So the conflict is still there. These things are still very alive. And I think that that's what I want to use the opportunity to expand in my writing and my show, in this creative cauldron that I'm in. And remembering not to attach too much to the form, because it's part of the dance and exploration. So if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So that idea of the patriarchal or authoritarian model of like, I'm going to help you, is the doctor-patient model in Western medicine. You come in, you tell me a few things, but really I, the doctor, know what's going on. I'm going to put a whole bunch of instruments on your body. I'm going to use my magic hands. Not even anymore. People probably don't even touch their patients anymore. Or I'm going to use my magical medical authority because of all the medical school I went to and all the residency training. And I, along with the magical medical system, are going to figure out what's wrong with you through our technologies that are totally mysterious and expensive. So for things to have a high dollar value now, they have to have a mystery to them. They have to have a magician's quality to them so that people can further distance themselves from what's going on. And that distance is what they're paying for. And so our economic system rewards and is set up to continue that loop of rewarding distance and distance from our own sources of wisdom and healing, and elevation of certain individuals to levels higher than human that have the answers for us lowly recipients of things. That's patriarchy. And the decolonization of that is messy and complicated right now, but it's happening. So no longer, even 6-8 years ago, it was considered fringe. 4 years ago, kind of a dream. And as of 2 years ago, it's like everybody's trying to dive in their own way. So it's the other thing that the selfishactivist.com wrote about that's really important to remember is that because all of this is a trauma response, that everything, including the patriarchy, is a fight or flight response. This need to put people down here and have authorities up here and set up that whole cycle, whether it's socialism, capitalism, whatever system, that of um, certain people over others versus the liberation or the move toward liberation of and empowerment of people comes from trauma, comes from traumatized people that need to do that to assuage their own fears. And I wrote this too. This is the scariest thing for me, actually. I wrote this yesterday. And it came to me in a moment when I was doing Shipped, and I was like, what? I'm just like happy right now. I'm very happy to be doing this job that is so clear and so easy and so right up my alley because I just love the tasks of getting things right and shopping. I wrote, the less afraid I am, the less ambitious I need to be. And by ambitious, I mean that sort of that pushing, the striving to be somebody, important, famous, known, accomplished, all these things that drive us and that we admire so much and we point to and show our kids, like, look at that person, they're so great. How much of it is driven by terror, inside that person, and that running is what drives them. And then we admire that. And then we actually have to rev ourselves up. If we don't have the trauma, we've got it in that moment that we start to feel our own fear of our own inadequacy that then drives us to try to copy that. And so imagining that so much of the ambition and status seeking behavior comes from trauma, and that the implications for healing and transformation are also what we're up against. The obstacles to healing and transformation are that you stand to lose the very thing that drives you. And are you willing to do that for the sake of your own health and the health of those around you? Are you willing to give that up? The answer for most people is no, because they would never consider it. It's the most frightening thing to the soul, that terrified child inside. Soul. I'm just going to say soul. It doesn't have to be a child. It's just that terrified aluminum foil that can crumple in a heartbeat. And there's no way that from that consciousness of the crumpled up aluminum foil that they can imagine that they would even consider living from that place. And having just had this experience of believing that crumpled aluminum foil was actually me, the adult me, and not experiencing it until surprise attack, switching roles with another aspect of me and realizing, whoa, that's in me, but I actually relegate it to peripheral status. That is just amazing. That's sort of like a quantum leap expansion of self concept that happened in that moment, in that now I have access to it. So I have an experiential access to, whoa, like, I don't know, I'm about to crumple, or I can go to that crumpled space, or I can notice, wow, right now I'm mute. Where am I? What's happening? Who is responding right now? And let me step over here and respond from this different place. Even though, crumpled Lisa can't talk, I have another voice inside me that can. But if I'm not aware of that, which I wasn't, and you heard me talk about my inability to access that for weeks, months, and ever since last year when I realized it, if I'm not aware of that part of myself, how would I be able to shift to it? So it's a gradual, I think the point I was trying to make with this whole little paragraph is that because it's trauma and it was stored in the body, that trauma, that the change will happen through the body gradually and slowly, like we know with yoga. We can't just jump from having sat in chairs from birth, in car seats, strollers from the time we were born, and then chairs in school, and chairs to study, chairs for piano, chairs for orchestra. We can't just jump from chairs to like doing yoga. And even if we can do the pose in yoga, has our consciousness and our relationship in our body to the environment really changed? Or are we still performing even when we're doing yoga? So it's gradual, slow, and very contemplative, the change process. And I think that's why I find I'm losing that ability to push myself beyond my own the limits of my body. And I'm not talking about like the kind of pushing that builds strength that you're doing in weightlifting, but it's that driving that's based on fear. I'm losing the ability to keep driving myself based on fear because I'm more aware of that fear not being the basis of who I am anymore. That's not necessary to live from, that there's another way to be here. And that's so gradual, and it's so day by day, moment by moment, staying awake to it and not just plowing through the scripts that come first out of your mouth, out of my mouth. So that's what it is today. Everyday truth.